Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a supplemental session to our webinar, Playing by the Rules, Election Guidelines for Charities and Nonprofits. We did run out of time at our earlier webinar to answer all the great questions that came in through the Q&A function, and we're really grateful to our panelists for returning to provide those answers. My name is Jodene Baker. I'm the Vice President of Research, Advocacy, and External Relations here at Imagine Canada, and I am joined today by Sharmila Biswas-Mistry, the Senior Outreach Officer at Elections Canada, Amandine Le-Doan, the Technical Policy Advisor at the Canada Revenue Agency, and Frantz, Cherestal, Advisor at the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying. Thank you to all three of you for being here today. We are going to jump right into the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and read each question, and then for our panelists, please feel free to just jump in with the answer. So the first question: can I endorse a candidate while mentioning my role as a board member of a not-for-profit?
So I could take that one. So in the case of a registered charity specifically, the answer would be yes, as long as you make sure that you make it clear that the endorsement is personal and not the endorsement of a charity, or that the endorsement is made in your own personal capacity and not on behalf of the charity.
Great, thanks. Anything else to add? The next question, I think, Amandine, it's staying with you. Is it permissible for an employee to use the charity's computer or phone for partisan political activities on their personal time, or would this be considered using charitable resources for political purposes?
Yes. So in this scenario, the charity would likely be considered to be using its resource to support or oppose a political party or candidate, because the charity's computer or phones are still the charity's own resources, even when they're used by the employees on their own personal time.
Great, thank you. Next, we're moving into some questions that are related to charity involvement in elections. The first question here: if an organization spends no money, but employees dedicate time within their regular paid hours to election-related activities, does that count towards the $500 threshold for third-party registration?
I can provide some insight on that question. So if an organization directs their employees to dedicate some time within their regular paid hours to election-related activities, the value of their salary and wages for that time, as well as a reasonable allocation of general overhead costs, would count towards the $500 threshold for third-party registration. Amandine, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
No.
Oh, no. Okay, sorry.
No.
Okay.
Great, thanks. The next question: can charities analyze and grade party platforms on an issue they care about without being considered partisan?
Jodene, I can take that question again. It would be considered a partisan activity because you would be analyzing and assigning a grade on that particular party platform. These actions would be seen as, giving an assessment, opinion, or biases. So therefore, it would be trying to influence electors. And if you wanted to maybe stay away from that and engage in this kind of activity in a nonpartisan way, you would have to simply state the facts of all the political parties without any kind of interpretation or analysis. And I would like to just stress that it would be more advisable to provide that information across the board, like having more than just one political party, because then, you're highlighting, like, that can be, if you're only providing information or a platform on one party, that can also be seen as influencing.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Next question: if a candidate takes a strong stance for or against our mission, how should we respond?
I think I can answer that again. So, if a candidate takes a strong stance for or against your mission during an election period, any future advertising by your organization can take a position for that takes a position for or against this particular issue would be considered a regulated activity, as in election advertising. So it's important to note that not all ads that talk about issues are regulated. The broader message, the less likely it is that it has a clear association, can be found. So advertising that cannot be canceled or that has already been transmitted would not retroactively be subject to these rules.
Okay, great. Next, a question on voting patterns. So can a charity share past electoral district voting patterns alongside MPs' voting records, or would that be considered indirect political support?
Well, sharing past electoral district patterns along with MPs' voting records would not be considered to be regulated activities as long as it does not promote or oppose a party or candidate.
So I can also add for registered charities specifically. So a charity could provide factual and neutral information about how an electoral district has voted in the past on a particular issue and also share the MP's voting records. That would be allowed. However, the charity could not just single out the voting pattern of any political party or candidate. That would be prohibited under the Act.
Great, thank you. The next question, can a charity publicly comment on threats to democracy if those issues impact their mandate?
So the answer,
oh.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Amandine. I'll
Sure.
follow you.
Okay, thank you. So a charity can comment on any issues that is related to its mission. Essentially, a charity can devote its resources to any activity that contributes, facilitates, or supports the charity's ability to further its charitable purposes. And it can do so as long, of course, as it doesn't show any support or opposition to any political party or candidate.
Thanks, Sharmila.
Yeah, so as per the Canada Elections Act, a charity publicly commenting on the threats to democracy when those issues impact their mandate would only be considered to be regulated activities if those comments issued promote or oppose a party or candidate. However, if the charity posts comments that subsequently decides to pay to boost during the election period and the issue is closely associated with a party or candidate, this can also constitute election advertising.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question, if a candidate wants to tour our facility, including for a photo op during the election timeframe, is that allowed or cause for concern?
I can take that question. So if a candidate wants a tour of the facilities, including the photo op, during the election timeframe, your organization must invoice the candidate's campaign for any expenses that you incurred as a result of their visit in order to avoid making any kind of illegal contribution.
Thank you.
And I will also add, yeah, for charities, so it will depend on the circumstances of the situation. So if the photo op is meant to be an endorsement or show support of that candidate, of course, that would be likely to be offside. But in any case, it's important before engaging in those types of activities that the charity makes sure that the activity is able to further its charitable purposes and that it can be carried out in a way that complies with the Income Tax Act rule. So if it cannot be, the charity, I think the recommended approach would be to decline the invitation.
Great, thank you. And the next question, do provincial election rules apply in addition to federal election rules?
Jodene, I can take that question as well. So provincial entities responsible for elections would need to be contacted directly to determine whether there are similar third-party rules when they apply. For example, for the current Ontario provincial election, and if this is related to that, you would need to reach out to Elections Ontario to get some clarification on that.
Great, thanks. All right, we're moving into the next section of questions relating to lobbying rules and public policy activities. So the first question in this section, do volunteers engaging in lobbying on behalf of a charity need to register as lobbyists?
Okay, so first I want to clarify what the Lobbying Act considers volunteers. So it's someone who does not receive compensation beyond the reimbursement of their expenses. So either as an employee or as a consultant. So if you're getting compensation as an employee to do other tasks that are not lobbying, and then you just happen to do lobbying as a volunteer, you're not considered a volunteer because you receive compensation. But if you truly do not receive any compensation, then you do not need to register, and you're not required to be named in the organization's registration.
Thank you. Next question. What are the main differences between rules for a nonprofit without charitable status versus those who are a registered charity?
So the Lobbying Act does not make that distinction, so the same rules would apply.
Okay, great. That's helpful.
Yeah, I will add that just election rules in general, I would say that so a registered charity is different in the sense that they are subject to the exact same rules as all other nonprofits, except they have additional rules that you need to abide by that are set out in the Income Tax Act. And essentially, there are two rules. So any PPDDA, so any political activity that the charity carries out, needs to be furthering their stated charitable purposes. And the second is that charities are subject to the prohibition on supporting or opposing a political party or candidate. So those are essentially the two additional rules that charities need to abide by versus nonprofits.
Great, thank you. Next question. Do lobbying rules apply differently if a member of parliament initiates first contact?
Okay, so that's going to be a long answer. Okay, so first, if the communication falls into the category of oral or written submissions to parliamentary committees, then you would need to contact us to make sure that it actually falls into that category, because oftentimes people think it does and it actually doesn't. But if we determine that it does, then you do not need to register that activity or report that activity, because they would have already put it on their website, like in the House of Commons website. And our goal is transparency and for the public to see what lobbyists are doing. So if it's already posted on the House of Commons, we don't need to duplicate that process. Now, if it does not fall into that category, then if it's a written communication and it's about legislation, policies, programs, grants, contributions, etc., then you would need to make sure that that entity, government entity, is already mentioned in your registration, and what you discussed as well to be in your registration. Now, if it's an oral communication that is arranged in advance with a designated public office holder about a prescribed topic, so legislative proposals, etc., then you would only need to send a monthly communication report if that meeting had to do with grants, contributions, financial benefits, and in the case of consultants, awarding of contract as well. And that's only because it's a public office holder who initiated that contact. If it was you who initiated that contact, then you would need to submit a report if you discuss all the other lobbying topics.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question. Are official agents in election campaigns subject to cooling off periods under lobbying rules?
Yes. So official agents seems to me like it's a significant role. So it would most likely come with a 24-month prohibition on lobbying, or cooling off period, I should say. But you can always contact our office to confirm.
Okay, thank you. For the 20% rule on registering as a lobbyist, does it apply to the organization as a whole or only to specific employees?
So it's to the organization as a whole. So the way you would calculate that, first of all, the 20% is 8 hours a week for 4 consecutive weeks. And then you would have 2 months from that time to register. So in that calculation, it's the time that all the employees spend to pursue all the employees spend doing lobbying activities. And in that calculation, you have to include anything that makes the lobbying possible. So the research, the communications, the meetings, etc. And so, for example, the 8 hours could be one person doing all the work, or it could be 8 people doing 1 hour each. And also, just a heads up, the commissioner said that she is reviewing that threshold. And when the parliament resumes their function, then she will publicize what her decision is.
Okay, we'll keep our eyes and ears out for that. The next question, are charities allowed to provide information tailored to a political party in the course of their lobbying, public policy, or advocacy activities?
So the Lobbying Act does not restrict it.
Okay. Amandine, did you?
Yeah, I can also comment on this in light of the Income Tax Act rules. So a charity can provide, it depends what it means to be tailored to a political party. So when providing information about public policy issues, a charity's communication should focus on the policy issue at hand and not refer to any political party. It can share the same views as a political party, but the positions, the views or actions of a political party do not transform the activities of the charity into support or opposition to that political party. For example, if a political party is commonly known to share the same views communicated by the charity, that would not transform the charity's activities into support or opposition to that political party. So what the CRA considers when determining if a charity is complying with the rules is the activities of the charities itself. So as long as the communications are neutral and focus on a public policy issue, it should not be offside.
Okay, great, that's helpful. What are the consequences if a charity engages in public policy dialogue and development activities not directly related to their charitable purpose?
So,
yeah,
so for us, we would ask you to contact us with the details, just so we can determine if it falls within lobbying. But yeah.
Amandine?
Yeah, so when it comes to the CRA, when monitoring the activities of charity, the CRA generally relies on a risk-based approach. So for an instance of non-compliance, it would generally first give the charity an opportunity to correct the non-compliance through either education, outreach, or a compliance agreement. More serious consequences like sanctions or revocation are really usually reserved for more serious or repeated acts of non-compliance.
Thank you. And moving on to just a final couple of questions related to social media and public engagement. If a charity posts neutral policy content on social media and users comment in a partisan way, is the charity responsible for moderating those comments?
So a charity cannot host or help facilitate messaging that supports or opposes a party or candidate. So if a charity provides a platform that allows the public to comment on public policy issues like a social media page or blog, it is expected to monitor those platforms to the extent that it's allowable by the platform itself, and also expected to remove any messages that would support or oppose a party or candidate.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is asking supporters to report inappropriate political actors, such as misleading social media accounts, to Elections Canada considered partisan activity?
So I think I'll start, and Sharmila, if you have anything to add, feel free to comment. In light of the Income Tax Act rules, so this would be unlikely to be considered support or opposition of a political party or candidate. However, charities need to keep in mind that any activity that they carry out must further their charitable purposes. So it still needs to be otherwise a charitable activity.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Amandine, is asking supporters to report inappropriate political actors would only be considered a partisan activity if it promotes or opposes a party or candidate. And also note that any concerns should be communicated to the commissioner of the Canada's elections. This is the office that is independent officer responsible for ensuring ensuring that the Canada Elections Act is complied with and enforced.
Thank you. So that's the end of the questions that we had. And again, those were all outstanding questions that came in from original webinar. Before we wrap up, I might give all of you just one last opportunity to say something. We had so many questions and, great engagement from the nonprofit and charitable sector. And we understand that these are highly regulated activities and they're there for a reason. What might you say to an organization that is feeling, a little bit overwhelmed and nervous by seeing all these questions and feeling like, I don't want to step offside and might be feeling as though like, well, maybe I just won't do anything. Maybe I just won't engage. Is there anything that you can say to help reassure these organizations that, we still do want them to be engaged in the election process? So open question to any of you to jump in. Or all of you.
I'll start if you don't mind. For Elections Canada, we think that everybody has a role to play in elections, especially engaging with communities, making sure that people have the right information and that they're going to the right source of information, which is Elections Canada as it pertains to the process of registering and voting and working in an election and being a candidate. My advice to that is don't ever hesitate to reach out to myself. I know that we've provided our contact information and we're here to answer questions just to make sure that everybody has a chance to be engaged in elections.
Thanks, Sharmila.
Okay, I can go next.
Yeah.
Okay, so our office recognizes that political activities and even lobbying is a perfectly legitimate activity. So we don't necessarily want to restrict that. If you have any questions, just reach out to our office. And we also offer free outreach sessions that go in great detail about what is considered lobbying, what your responsibilities are, etc. So don't ever think you should not be doing something just because you would think it would be out of bounds. At the very least, contact our office first, and then you can make that decision.
Amandine?
Yeah. So the Income Tax Act was actually amended, as I mentioned during the webinar in 2018, to give a lot more latitude for charities to carry out political activities, or PPDAs, as the Income Tax Act calls them. So now there are no quantitative limits on the amount of PPDAs that a charity can carry out, and they're treated like any other charitable activity. So as long as it furthers your stated charitable purposes, they are charitable. Of course, there's the prohibition and limit on supporting or opposing a political party or candidate, but there are many ways that a charity can still carry out PPDAs without being offside. And I would actually invite you to consult our guidance, because it actually provides a lot of answers to the questions that we just answered in more detail. So, and of course, our client service representatives are more happy to help you if you have more specific questions before engaging in PPDAs.
Great. All right, well, that brings us to the close of this session. So I will just end with once again thanking you, Frantz, Amandine, and Sharmila for your time today, and wishing you all the best. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.